Welcome everyone to the Newly podcast. Welcome this Thursday morning. This is where you get practical, no BS insights on how to grow yourself and grow your career. You'll notice I'm not in my typical studio. We're just going with the flow today. Had some unexpected news yesterday, but we have an amazing guest today. I'm so excited. On this episode, we have Dr. Jim Kanichirayil. Welcome, Dr. Jim. Thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Britta. I'm super excited to be on the show, and I'm looking forward to a pretty interesting conversation, and hopefully with some engagement from the folks that are out catching this on the stream. Maybe they'll drop in some questions, and we can handle some pop flies too.
I would love that. I would love that. Yeah, we've had a lot of engagement lately, so I'm betting that we already got someone saying hello, Dr. Casey. Thank you so much, Dr. Casey DeBruin. All right. Well, I like to start every podcast with each person that I talk to about what their career journey was. So where they've started at their career and how they've gotten to where they are. And as I recall, you have a pretty unique journey. So I'm excited to hear a little bit about this. Why don't you just tell us about that journey?
Yeah, so I think the best way to describe my career path, I've spent most of my time in startup and accelerating growth organizations. That's kind of my wheelhouse. I've tried uh, executing things at larger organizations, and I've kind of found it pretty stifling in terms of how I operate.
Mm.
And in general, my lens that I apply, and we're going to talk about in this conversation, is going to be from the revenue side of an organization. So, all the advice that you're going to get it from the perspective of somebody that has basically been in sales and marketing adjacent roles throughout their career. So, when you think about the context that I'm going to be offering whatever advice that I offer, it's going to be through the lens of startup and accelerating growth organizations within the revenue side of those organizations. So, from a career path perspective, I've basically held just about every non C suite role in a revenue organization that you can think of. I've spent most of my career as an individual contributor. And even in a people leadership role, my philosophy is always lead from the front. I'm a big believer in show, observe, shape as far as how you build teams. So I'm not afraid to get in the trenches and be alongside the team when it comes to executing. And I think that's the best way, in my opinion. I think leading by example and leading from the front versus just operating in theory is the best way to move forward. So hopefully that helps.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. One thing I was just so curious about, excuse me, about that show, observe, shape. Can you just dig a little bit deeper into that? It's just so fascinating.
Yeah, so it's a fundamental sort of operating rhythm that I've always had. I learned it pretty early on in my career. And the principle of it is really simple. If you're trying to teach somebody or if you're trying to lead a team to do a thing, whatever that thing is, what you want to do as a leader is first show how it's done. Then you observe the person that you're teaching do the thing. There's a little bit of engagement after that. After you watch them do the thing, you ask them for feedback on how it went, what they thought, what they struggled with. And that's the shaping part of it.
Mm.
And when it comes to the shaping part of it, the nuance in it, and this took me a while to get to because I tend to be the smartest guy in the room. And that's a big issue for me, is that you always, to be highly effective, you need to focus on asking the questions instead of telling people what to do.
Right.
And that's a skill that you have to practice, especially when it comes to shaping behavior. It's not, you know, do it this way.
Right.
It's what did you think about how you did it? Where did you struggle?
Mm.
What worked well? How would you do it differently? What do you think about this? And
Mhm.
those sort of questions from a leadership perspective, in terms of teaching anybody anything, those questions actually lead to the aha moments versus you just telling somebody what needs to be done. So,
That's
quick shout out to Steve, Trevor, and Casey, who are hanging out in the chat. So nice to see you guys
Yeah,
over
I
there.
also saw Damon as well hanging out there. And I appreciate you just diving into that. I just get really curious. We kind of veered off topic a little bit, but who cares? But I'm really excited for this topic. Our topic today is redefining an authentic approach to career growth. And we're looking at it, like you said, from the sales and revenue side. And when I first met you, I remember you talked about breaking down these misconceptions that daily tasks are sort of an indication of career success. So, can you explain to me what you meant by that, or what you mean by that, and why someone should think differently about how they go about measuring success in their job and career?
Yeah, there's a bit of nuance to it, and I'll try to tackle it as best I can.
Yeah.
I think when you're early in your career, it's fine to be activity driven.
Hmm.
But the quicker you move from activity driven to outcomes driven, especially from the revenue side of the organization, the better off you're going to be. And the reality of it is that you often see when somebody asks you, "How was your day?" The answer is going to be, "Oh, I was super busy." And the question out of that response becomes, well, what were the results?
Yeah.
Like, what were you busy doing? And this is where the overemphasis on task accomplishment has kind of skewed the perspective of how you move about the world in the revenue side of an organization, and
Hmm.
especially sales.
Yeah.
And the reality of it is that nobody cares how many calls you made. Nobody cares how many
Yeah.
emails that you sent.
Yeah.
Nobody cares about all of that stuff. It's good from your perspective to just get the reps in. What people care about is how are you moving the needle across everyone that you talk to a point where they're either closer to a yes or closer to a no. The
Hmm.
quicker that you can move across that buyer journey and get to those outcomes that realize revenue, the better off you're going to be. So, the biggest lesson that I can share for early to mid career sales professionals and revenue professionals, don't get wrapped up in the mystique of, hey, I did 1,000 things today. Well, big deal. How many of those resulted in meaningful conversations and meetings that helped you move the needle and move across the buyer journey? That's where the focus should be.
Right.
And the reality of it is that that obsession with activity over achievement, and I fully put the blame on the growth at all costs crowd and
Mm.
sales leadership
Yeah.
that have overemphasized activity. I put it at their feet because what's been the outcomes of that sort of behavior in the world of work, especially from a sales and marketing perspective? Nobody wants to talk to you if you're a sales professional or a marketing professional and you're reaching out to them about something, because people have been conditioned to believe that this is just part of a numbers game, and that's really damaging to you as an individual but also as a profession. Sorry, I'll get off my soapbox now.
No, I don't apologize in any way. This is why we have you on here. I am so refreshed by that perspective, and I think what's so interesting is there's this shift really going on, especially in sales. And I think you point directly to this: is that you know get those dials in, get those dials. Nobody answers their phone. Nobody answers their phone, and then that same idea of like get the dials in is translated to emails, and it's like you're going to get filtered out in spam. Like, you have to try a new approach. And I think it really points to this, like, beyond task orientation. It's like, how am I moving the needle forward in the relationships that I'm developing, right? And so why do you think our culture is so, or like the culture of work cultures, sales cultures are so metrics heavy? And how does that sort of trip us up when we're working towards real outcomes?
That's a great question, and it would lend itself to a lot of different perspectives.
Mm.
Um, I'll kind of answer it this way. I'll refer back to a book by Casey Graham, and he is the CEO of Gravy.
Mhm.
And what Casey wrote about in his No BS, I'm missing the title, but I read it. It's the No BS small business book or something like that.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
But and I'll send it to you. I'll send you the actual title after the show. But I
Mhm.
would recommend everybody check it out. But one of the key issues in terms of why are we where we are is Casey's point about everybody's obsessed with business porn. And business porn, in his book, he describes it as everybody is making announcements about, look what we did on G2, look at this level of funding that we got. We're the next unicorn. We're going to be the next thing that goes, to IPO status in like 4 months and whatever.
Yeah.
And all of that conditioning has done two things. At the individual level, that constant stream of business porn shifts your brain into thinking, well, if I'm not at that level of what I'm seeing, I'm a failure. And
Mm,
that's also infected sort of organizational philosophy where everybody is chasing the goal of becoming the next unicorn. So
mm,
success or failure is defined by just hitting that status of unicorn status, whatever that means. And if you don't reach that, you're a failure as a business. So when we're asking for about root causes of why this overemphasis on metrics exists, it's because everybody is obsessing about becoming the next unicorn instead of focusing on how do I build a sustainable business that is healthy at its foundational level, that has good retention, good production, and is iteratively improving.
yeah.
That's where the focus should be, not this, hey, we're going to shoot the moon, we're going to be the next unicorn. That emphasis on that sort of thinking has led to this over reliance on metrics across revenue teams.
Yeah, and I think, the idea of like we're going to shoot the moon and be that next unicorn is like oftentimes I've seen those types of companies like, they burn brightly and they die fast. And like that's more common, I believe, recently than companies having reaching unicorn status, having a ton of funding, and then, really actually being successful. So I think that I love your emphasis on building a sustainable business, and that takes consistency. And I love. I believe previously you talked about authenticity and expertise as sort of currency now. And what does that really mean? To be an authentic sales professional, in any environment.
So being authentic is going to mean different things to different people. And I can only reference sort of my experience. And for other people who are wired the way that I am, what I'm about to say might make a lot of sense. And I know that Trevor's hanging out on the live stream and he and I see eye to eye on a lot of things.
Yeah.
So when a couple of old heads, so we're both Gen Xers, came up in the world of work and especially in sales, everything in terms of sales leadership and philosophy was rooted around the concept of, if you want to be an effective salesperson, you got to be great with people, you got to be the person that owns the room, you got to be able to come in and talk to everybody, and you have to be great at small talk and all this other like heavily um, extroverted oriented personality trait driven characteristics that equal success in sales. That was where we came up in. And both Trevor and I, we've had these conversations before. We kind of bristled against it because we didn't sell that way. We,
Yeah.
and especially in my experience, I never felt comfortable in that traditional box of what a salesperson is supposed to do, supposed to look like, how they're supposed to behave, all of that sort of stuff.
Hmm. Hmm.
So when we think about authenticity, it's going to mean different things to different people. But for me, it was completely inauthentic being a smile and dial moron. No offense to anybody that likes doing that stuff.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
I got the volume out, but the whole idea that sales is purely a numbers game. And if you're not hitting your numbers, you just need to do more. Well, if you're already doing crappy stuff and doing more crappy stuff isn't going to get you the results that you need, it never made much sense to me. So
Yeah.
my focus in terms of being authentic was, okay, what am I really skilled at? I'm a big ass nerd.
Hmm.
So let me leverage my ability to dive deep in whatever industry that I'm operating in and use that as a way to connect with people within the ecosystem and maybe drive meaningful insight to them that's going to help them in their business independent of what it might mean for me. So when you talk about authenticity, you can't be authentic without being generous first. You
Mm,
have to be a student of whatever it is that you're in. and you have to just consume that information as much as possible, because that's going to actually offer you some insights that's going to help reframe some embedded thinking that might be existing within your customer base, and to help shift the conversation that way. But you have to start with being committed to helping,
Yes.
independent of what it means for you from a success perspective. So start there first, being for me, and what that meant was, okay, how can I really deeply understand the segments that I operate in, and what are the trends, what are the indicators that I can surface in my conversations to the people that I'm talking to. So that was one thread, and the other thread was, how can I spotlight what's important to that person that I'm talking to first, and make them the star of whatever interaction that we have,
Mhm.
and build a relationship from there. And that's rooted in another book that I read, which is called Customer for Life. And that book is rooted in the idea that most most revenue organizations operate with this idea that these things are transactional. It's a win lose relationship.
Mhm.
And they treat the entire ecosystem as if everybody in that ecosystem is ready to buy right now. Well,
Mhm.
what Customer for Life does is that it shifts that buyer seller relationship to more of a partnership, where the people that you're talking to are probably not going to be ready to buy now. But if you do the right things over time, they'll buy at some point, and you want to create the circumstances where they're buying from you because you've served them with such generosity and helped advance their interests. If you do that first, it's going to come around. So it's sort of a karmic relationship that you
Yeah.
talk about.
Yeah. Yeah, I love your emphasis on, making the customer the hero, or making the person that you're interacting with sort of the hero of the conversation by understanding what's important to them. And I think too, I like to bring in the idea and authenticity of, there's this sort of this existential idea that being authentic is being authentic to who you could become, not necessarily who you are in the moment, who you could become. And I think that speaks to these types of conversations that you want to have with individuals, where you are coming with knowledge that you've acquired previously to be able to connect with them, and you're being authentic to what the potential of this relationship could be, by making this person the hero of this conversation. So, how does growing a genuine level of expertise sort of set us apart from other professionals in a career landscape, in like in sales or in any other discipline?
So that's a great question. And I think the best way that I can answer it is this: you're going to deep dive into whatever segment that you're in, or do whatever's authentic for you, so that you can actually drive value for whoever you're talking to.
Mhm,
But the
mhm.
key is, you're not going to show up and just tell them a bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
You're going to do the same thing that you would do if you're applying the SOS methodology, show, observe, shape. You're going to ask the questions. So what learning and diving deep in your industry or in your areas of expertise does is that it arms you with the questions that you should ask, that will help that person that you're talking to come to a unique conclusion, or something that they haven't considered before. Now that's rooted, part of that is rooted in the challenger sale methodology. So for those who are listening or watching or whatever, and want to build deep expertise in sales methodology, challenger sale is highly recommended. They have a great podcast too that I would recommend checking out.
Mhm.
But what that methodology does is that it allows you to ask the questions that whoever you're talking to hasn't considered, or reframe an existing problem in a new and unique way, so that you're actually creating a conversation about what could that mean to that person that's across from you. So the intent or the purpose of doing all this nerd stuff and like diving deep into the areas of expertise isn't so you can show up and just word vomit a bunch of stuff that you know.
Right.
It's so that you can be prepared to ask the necessary questions to create a meaningful conversation, and potentially set you up for something that is more valuable from a revenue perspective.
I think it's so valuable that you talk about asking the right question, and veering the conversation in the right direction so that that person can see the potential in the relationship. Give me an example of where this asking the right question really helped you succeed. I'm just so curious about that.
Um, so there's a ton of instances. I mean, whether you're talking about a people leadership example or a customer example, um, the way that I'll frame it is this way. So most of my experience has been in employee lifecycle related technology or services.
Yeah.
So anything that deals with employees, how you hire them, how you develop them, how you onboard them, how you retain them. So I've gone through my doctoral researches on basically why people join and leave organizations, because I kind of figured, well, I want to have a different type of conversation with the people that I'm engaging with. And I want to really understand kind of what they're doing from a business strategy perspective. So I just went deep into that area.
Hmm.
So whenever people are evaluating a problem or trying to solve a problem, I always lead with, okay, this is the problem that you're having. Give me a little bit more context about why that's existing. How does this take shape within your environment? What's the impact on you? Who else is aware of those problems? So these are deep dive sort of discovery related questions that I'm just asking them rapid fire, but you're going to wait and hear what's said and then ask the next question that allows them to open up how severe this problem might be. And what that allows you to do is that it allows you to properly diagnose what's going on. So whether you're talking about um, a people development issue or a customer vendor issue where you're trying to uncover what the real problem is, what this allows you to do is that it allows you to properly diagnose what's really going on. And that's important. That's critically important, because what happens typically in sales is that sellers will ask the one question or maybe the two questions, and as soon as they hear what they want to hear, um, there's another podcast I listen to. It's called 30 Minutes of President's Club, and the host, his name is slipping my mind, but he often calls it getting happy ears. And Jen Allen also talks about getting happy ears, where sellers will ask a couple of questions, hear what they want to hear, and then move immediately into solutioning.
Mm.
If you did that as a doctor, you would be sued for malpractice, because you're diagnosing before you fully understand what's going on within that environment. Prescription before diagnosis is malpractice. So you don't
Yeah.
want to prescribe a solution before fully understanding what's going on, and that's where the value of questioning, and also deep questions where you're drilling down to the individual impact as well as the enterprise impact, and then the cost of not doing anything.
Hmm.
Mapping all of that out will help you understand the readiness of that particular person that you're talking to make meaningful change. And that's where the power of questions arms you to be effective in driving change across whatever you want to drive.
Yeah, and okay, I love the idea that these questions are deep dives and discovery questions, and that they're rather simple. It's not You're not pulling out a bunch of technical terms and asking them something very obscure to show your expertise. You're really asking them quite simple questions and risking maybe being seen in a certain way, but that's going to give you valuable information that will propel you much further than term dropping some kind of fantastical industry term that would wow them in some way. So I think it's just so authentic. I love that.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you Leslie Vanetz talks about this often, and
I love that.
so
Great.
does Wesleyan,
Mhm.
talks about this often. The trap that a lot of people that dig deep into learning within the industry, the trap that they fall into is that they want to vomit out all that jargon
Mhm.
and appear as if they're so knowledgeable about the topic that you're automatically setting yourself in a power dynamic where you're prescribing a solution before even understanding that specific problem. So
Yeah.
the advice that I would offer is, in anything that you do, what you want to do is be disciplined about asking simple questions that a reporter would ask: who, what, when, where, why, how,
Mm,
those sort of questions about anything that you get, to fully understand the situation that the person sitting across from you is facing, so that you're building a custom path that aligns with that person's current state. Like, meet your customers where they are, meet whoever you're talking to where they are. That's how you do that, by asking the simple questions, so
right.
you can really get an understanding of where that person is and then meet them where they are versus drive them to where you want them to be.
Yeah. And I think meeting them where they are, again, is another example of being authentic. You're not going to try to drag them along the customer journey as fast as you can. I get this image in my mind of like someone dragging someone behind a horse, or you know what I mean? Just like that never goes well. It just never goes well, you know?
Well, yeah, it doesn't. But think about, we're having a sales and marketing related conversation right now, and
Mhm.
career navigation within that space. But think about how sales methodologies are designed. Think about like the concept of the sales funnel. It
Mhm.
assumes a linear path from one step to the other. And what are we as sales professionals taught when it comes to navigating this process? It's
Mhm.
a win lose relationship. So we have our process, we have our funnel. Our job is to move whoever is in that process and in that funnel to the next stage based on what we think is relevant, or what we think is the right stage. It
Yeah.
completely ignores, to your point, something that you mentioned earlier, making the buyer the hero in the story, or making the other person that you're sitting across from the hero in their story. It ignores what's important to them. So
Mhm.
when you're talking about meeting somebody where they are, it relies on having genuine curiosity on one element of it on your part,
Mhm.
but it also relies on you being generous as how you engage in that interaction. If you're just trying to move people through a funnel, or through move people through a methodology, you're not doing either. You're driving your own self interest in that effort.
Well, and let's say we take this into like career growth, or an interview, being genuinely curious about the organization that you're interviewing at, or being genuinely curious about the individuals that you're networking with and interacting. That genuine curiosity goes much farther than, somebody who's read over a company's website and can, parrot back the mission and vision in an interview, you know. What would you say to that if we took this idea into, let's say, somebody who's about to interview for new positions?
Yeah, when you're talking about, I really like something that you mentioned just a second ago in the question, which was looking at the mission and vision of an organization before you go into an interview. That's a critical element in the interview process. And the way that you can engage your curiosity is start everything from that point. And
Hmm.
here's what I mean. When you look at high performing teams and high performing organizations, one of the big gaps that occur, or that one of the big differences between those organizations that are high performing and those organizations that are not, is the ability for everybody, or the majority of people within the organization, to connect the job that they're doing to the mission, vision, and values of the organization. So
Yeah.
in an interview setting, if you as a candidate don't have visibility into the mission, vision, and values, and can't ask the questions that connect those to the tasks and the outcomes and the activities associated with the job that you're applying for, if you're not asking those questions and you're not having your manager kind of connect those dots, or the person that you're interviewing connect those dots, you're going to be set up for a really tough go. And
Mm,
what it's gonna mean is that in the actual job, it just becomes a job versus a purpose.
mm,
So
yeah.
you're just doing a bunch of things to get a bunch of things done, with no idea, or very limited idea, of how this impacts the bigger picture. How does this move the company forward? How does this help the customer? How does this make the world better the job that I'm doing. And if your manager can't connect that to the work that you do, you're going to be disengaged before you even start. So in an interview setting, you want to connect and you want to evaluate, okay, how are these things connected? Operate from a place of curiosity, and then it's sort of a challenging question to ask the interviewing team, but if they can't connect those, that's a big red flag in a job search scenario. Like if
Yeah.
they don't know how the work connects to the bigger purpose, how do they expect you to figure that out? And from an individual's perspective, how are you supposed to like be committed or, you know, do excellent work if you're just looking at it purely as a task, as a check the box?
Yeah, and I think too, I liked that you talked about if they can't connect those things for you immediately in the interview in some way, likely motivation is going to be an issue. Like you said, it's just going to become you're going to become a task rabbit that's just checking things off. And if there's no purpose behind it for you, you're going to lose drive quick. You might have, burn bright and fade fast. And I've done that too in organizations where I've, burned bright and then 3 months later, it's all faded fast because I wasn't connected to that mission. Very interesting stuff. So let's say someone is listening and they're really resonating with what you're saying. What are some actionable steps that they could take to shift from this idea of task orientation to developing authenticity and expertise at any stage in their career?
So those are two separate things that we want to tackle. So let's talk about how do you break out of the task orientation, because if you're too task oriented for too long a time and you get really good at knocking out tasks, you're just going to get more tasks to do, and at a certain point, depending on how linear those tasks are, you're putting yourself at risk because you could get, outsourced or AI'd out of that task execution
Right.
piece of it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you need to be aware of that risk that exists. So how do you get out of just a pure task focus? It starts really with having honest conversations with whoever your leader is.
Mm.
And you want to make sure that in your one-on-ones you're doing a couple of things. How does this list of things that I'm supposed to do connect with the bigger purpose? Out of this list of things, what are the biggest priorities when it comes to driving the bottom line or driving the results that you need as a manager to be deemed a success?
Mhm.
Asking those questions will help you identify what are the highest value tasks that you need to be working on and what's going to make the most impact. So everybody has 50 things that they need to do in a day. If you're consistently focusing on the top 3 things that drive positive outcomes for your business, for your manager, for whatever success looks like, you're always going to be in good footing. So you need to that's how you make that connectivity.
Yeah.
Now, when you're talking about how do you do that from a personal development perspective, some of that comes from those one-on-one conversations as well. You should be asking, hey, what are the gaps that you see in my capability that I need to shore up to get to the next level? So you have to say that stuff out loud
Mhm.
versus just, operating on autopilot. Now,
Mhm.
once you have that line of sight, and you can get that line of sight by asking your managers that question, asking your peers that question, then you need to really take some time to evaluate, from a self-evaluation perspective, out of those gaps that have been identified, what are the ones that best align with the vision that I have for where I'll be 2 years from now, 3 years from now, and let me work on those things.
Mhm.
So every year you should be looking at, or every year, every quarter, you should be looking at that list of things that you want to work on to get to that vision that you have for yourself a year from now, 2 years from now, and move those things forward, because you have to be disciplined in investing in yourself, because you can't rely on companies to do that. You can't rely on managers to do that. You can't rely on any external forces to do that. You have to be disciplined about asking the questions about yourself and where you want to be, and tying that to the vision that you have for yourself, because that's going to map out what you need to do and what priority it needs to be.
Yeah. Yeah, I think what was so interesting throughout this, and it sparked my interest right at the beginning of the conversation, but you talked about, remaining task oriented, AI might push you out. Like that is the real danger here is, and I'm not one to kind of generate a lot of fear around AI. I think there's a lot of really great things that can come from it, but the danger of remaining in a task-oriented mindset is that you could get outsourced by AI. So if we're choosing not to shift, like you said, into this disciplined way of thinking about, where do I see myself in several years? How are the tasks I'm doing right now connect to that? And asking those questions in one-on-ones, you're really setting yourself up for something that might not go very well. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the thing that I will add, and I'll bring this full circle to the comment that I had. Don't confuse activity with achievement, and especially if you're talking about being in the revenue side of an organization and being in sales, what does what does everybody obsess about? It's the activity metrics.
Yeah.
Well, guess what's out there that can always out activity you in terms of the volume that they can get out. I mean, there are companies that I know of that are going through acquisitions, and then they're eliminating staff and offshoring some of them to other global locations, and then supplementing that offshore effort with AI because it's cheaper to do it.
Yeah.
So, with you as a professional, when you're thinking about your career navigation and how do you make yourself indispensable to the degree that you can make yourself indispensable, think like a human. You're
Mm,
never going to outperform anything on a raw activity basis. So look at the function that you're in and look at integration points. And here's what I mean. So I'm on the revenue side of it. I've spent my career in sales,
yeah.
and I've always been on the revenue side of an organization. So, what am I doing to make myself as indispensable as possible over the term of my career? Well, I've invested in myself in terms of learning specific areas that are relevant to the niche uh, that I uh, uh, that I engage with.
Mhm.
But I've also looked at, okay, when you look at a revenue organization, what are the components of a revenue organization? There's sales, there's marketing, there's partnerships.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I've been intentional about is figuring out ways where you can integrate all three of those as a single uh, person, and you bring that to market as your product. So I think of myself as a product. And when I think about, okay, how do I want to present myself to a potential consulting opportunity or a potential, hiring manager or whatever, the value that I bring is that I can actually help you not only drive thought leadership into the market, but I can also leverage pure sales, marketing, and partnerships as a single go to market motion. And
Ooh,
that's my unique, special sauce in the marketplace. You can do that in any function. What you need to do is what really doesn't exist in the marketplace that I can productize myself and be a unique offering to a hiring manager that you can't AI out.
yeah. Yeah, definitely can't AI out partnerships and relationships. I mean, I like that you talk about thinking about yourself as a product and what are those unique sort of selling points that you bring as a person. So we've neared the end of our time. We actually went a lot over our time, but I was just so fascinated by this conversation. I just really enjoyed it. But I like to end with a couple of rapid fire questions, if you don't mind. So the first rapid fire question is, what is the most random job that you have ever had?
So I'll this is going to be absolutely horrible. So and my the worst job that I've ever had was being a busboy when I was like 14, and that was terrible. And we can have some stories about that, but it actually informed a lot about a lot of my position on how you engage customers and how you interact from
Mhm.
that role. But the worst job that I had was, I think I was a junior or senior in college, and I worked for a friend of mine's dad's company, and that company did refurbishing of like heavy machinery,
Mhm.
and I was just a random shop worker,
Yeah.
and I had finished everything that needed to be done that they had planned for the entire summer in like 2 or 3 weeks.
Oh, wow.
So rather than let me go, and they didn't tell me this. Rather than let me go, they have like all of these different yards where they store the equipment before it's sold. I literally in the middle of the summer had to sweep the blacktop of the gravel and pull weeds, and I was like, this job is terrible. Like, why are you having me do this stuff? This is this is the worst. And
Janitorial work on blacktop. That's weird, man.
yeah, so that was pretty bad, and it was one of the two times in my entire life that I've gotten a sunburn because this was in the middle of the summer,
Yeah.
and I'm sweeping blacktop and pulling weeds.
Oh
That
my
sucked.
gosh. Well, love that, and we've all been there, and I have so many stories about the service industry that have informed the way that I've moved forward in my career. I feel like everybody should have a job in the service industry at least once in their life. I feel like it should be a requirement. But beyond that, the last rapid fire question is: what is the worst career advice that you've ever gotten?
That's a good one. I think it's not really advice. It was a sideways comment, and this happened earlier in my career. This probably was like 15 years ago or something like that. And I had no, it wasn't even 15 years ago. It was maybe 10 years ago. Um, so I had just finished off my master's program, and I was kicking around the idea of starting my doctoral program.
Mhm.
And I was in the staffing industry, and the VP that I reported into, and it wasn't directed at me, but we were having a weekly stand up where we're figuring out what was going to happen in the week, and the sales performance wasn't where it should have been for the week prior. And the leader said, well, this job is really simple, you don't need a PhD to figure it out. And that didn't register in my head in the moment, but I had three or four different people mention it to me because it impacted them as if that comment was attacking me, and I didn't read it that way. but it's
Interesting.
but the interesting thing about that is this idea that if you're in sales, you don't have to use your brain to be effective. That was the broader point, which is terrible advice. I
Yeah.
think if you're in sales, you have to be exceptionally invested in learning and exercising your brain about all sorts of different things that impact the customer's world. So if you're relying on just pure activity and personality to win in sales, there may be a few that can get away with that, but that's not going to be the reality going forward. So if anybody tells you that you don't have to use your brain in sales, they're giving you some terrible advice.
Yes, I agree. If anyone tells you you don't have to use your brain in any job, terrible advice. Yeah. Well, I want to thank everyone, especially you, Jim, for joining me. I want to thank everybody else for joining us. If you want to listen to this episode again, it goes live on all relevant podcasting channels in a week. Don't forget to subscribe to the channels and like and share with friends who you think might benefit from this information. And join me next week live at 8:30 a.m. for the Newly podcast, where you get more practical, no BS insights on how to grow yourself and grow your career. Thank you, Jim. Talk to you later.